If a heavily pregnant woman, and therefore her unborn child, passes away, how is the burial done? When I was an autopsy tech, we saw a few of these. If it was a witnessed event and any chance of a surviving fetus, an emergency C-section would be performed. This is pretty rare outside hospitals, though. It's much more common for a pregnant mother to die in her sleep, leading to the baby also passing away shortly thereafter, or during a traumatic event like a car wreck or assault that would affect the child. During autopsy, we would remove the womb and excise the fetus. Samples are taken as best we can. For a highly developed viable fetus, we would perform a full infant autopsy to verify that the baby was developing properly and not suffering from a complication that could have led to the mother's death. Problems can go both ways during pregnancy. For less developed fetuses, we might do anything from uterine scrapings to storing the entire underdeveloped contents for later microscopic and toxicological examination. Typically in an autopsy, after all the organs are removed and sampled, they are gathered in a biohazard bag and placed back inside the open body cavity, chest/abdomen. The funeral home receiving the body will handle them from there, depending on the type of final rest the person is given. For pregnancies like you're describing, we would bag the fetus and samples separately from the mom's organs and note on records that there is an extra bag containing a child. We would label the child's bag, place it somewhere very obvious like at mom's feet, and then add a note to the body bag for extra visibility. For the purpose of legal regulations, this is all still one person. Every state has different laws about permits for body transit, so we would not place an unborn fetus into a separate body bag to avoid confusion on this point. What happens after that is up to a mix of the family and funeral home. There were families that wanted even an underdeveloped or malformed fetus to be buried separately from the mom, and those that wanted them buried together. I'm not a lawyer, but to my knowledge there are no laws specifically dictating where or how an unborn child must be buried as long as they are compliant with existing burial regulations. It is possible that evolving political definitions of personhood for fetuses could complicate this in different jurisdictions. That's all for a different subreddit. Last context I'll add, since we're keeping it dark around here, healthy mom plus healthy baby suddenly dying isn't uncommon, but it's generally an exception because known pregnancies take priority for medical care. What we saw a lot more often with pregnant deaths was women who were either mentally ill or uninterested in caring for their pregnancies dying as a result of complications due to miscarriage. This meant the fetus would die but the body was unable to eject it without medical intervention, mom never sought a doctor's care, and the fetus would decompose in the womb and cause major infection. These cases get pretty gnarly, as you're dealing with decomposition in utero plus infection in mom plus complicated, lack of, medical histories, family dynamics when having to inform about a pregnancy that wasn't disclosed, etc. We'd follow the same procedure as best we could here, acknowledging that a decomposed fetus in an infected uterus is more akin to chicken noodle soup than developed anatomy. We would fully separate the uterine contents in these cases just like in any other pregnant death, though. Next story, is it inappropriate for a woman to use the men's restroom if there's an enormous line for the women's room but none for men? This is not political. I went to an event with my mother and she's in her mid-70s. The line for the women's restroom wrapped all the way down the stairs, while there was no line in front of the men's restroom. My mother needed to truly use the restroom, but obviously I didn't want to be rude. I asked some of the women at the front of the line if they wanted to ask about going in the men's room as it didn't appear anyone was in there. Only one agreed. I knocked on the men's room door and loudly said I apologized for my rudeness, but would it make anyone uncomfortable if 3 women came in to please use the stalls? 2 males immediately yelled back no. And nope. We went in, did our thing, and the men were gone by the time we were done. There was a woman observing who called us disgusting and I felt kind of bad about it at first, but then I became confused. It wasn't as though I had just barged into the men's room. I asked if it was okay and there were 3 of us. My mother truly had to go and everyone at this venue complained that the restrooms for women are not adequate. In fact, some people don't make it back to their seats once the show restarted after intermission. Was this disgusting or rude? Edits I didn't expect to have to add. Yes, my mother and I wash our hands. No, we didn't look over at the urinals. There's a lot of comments about role reversal so I'll just clear it up. While I've yet to see a men's restroom have a line 50-ish people long with 0 in line for the women's restroom. If a man knocked on the door and asked if we minded if he and his father came in to use a couple of stalls, no, I would not have a problem with it. Comment, some years ago, I worked at a beachside restaurant that had way too few bathrooms, 2 stalls in the women's and a stall and a urinal in the men's. This situation came up a lot, and not a single guy ever cared. Except 2 adult women went into the bathroom. Their mother stood outside and tried to block any man from going into it. And the women were not speedy about it. this was like a 10-minute ordeal. The consensus was that guys didn't care if you used the bathroom, but it's not suddenly a women's room that men aren't allowed to use. Next story, can a waiter refuse to take an order because they think you're joking? This happened to me and a friend recently, and I still can't decide if it was bizarre, funny, or outright rude. We went to a new diner in town, known for its quirky menu and large portions. When the waiter came to take our order, my friend asked for one of their giant milkshakes, the kind with candy bars and donuts on top, and a double stack of pancakes. Pretty big meal, but it's what they're famous for. The waiter laughed, paused, and then said he wouldn't put the order in unless we got serious. We thought he was joking, so my friend repeated the order, and the waiter straight up refused again, saying, "Look, I get it, you want a photo op or whatever, but I'm not wasting food for an Instagram stunt." We tried explaining it wasn't a joke, and my friend actually planned to eat the food, but the waiter walked off and came back a few minutes later saying we should reconsider. We ended up leaving without ordering anything because the whole vibe was so awkward. Is it normal for a waiter to refuse an order like that, or was this way out of line? Have any of you ever experienced something similar? Next story, why does my boss hate me for being too efficient? Isn't that a good thing? Okay, so here's the situation. I, 28F, work at a small marketing agency. It's not a huge place, maybe 15 employees total, and we all juggle multiple responsibilities. I've been here for about 2 years, and in general, I've always gotten positive feedback about my work. I meet deadlines, I'm organized, and I always try to stay on top of things. But lately, my boss, let's call her Linda, has been acting weird. She's been increasingly critical of my work, and not because of the quality. Her main complaint? I'm too efficient. Which, to me, sounds like the opposite of a problem. But apparently, it's become one. It started a few months ago when we were working on a big client project. I wrapped up my part of the work 3 days ahead of schedule and sent it to Linda for review. I thought I was doing something helpful, giving her extra time to check things over or make edits. Instead of thanking me, though, she sent me a curt email saying, "You didn't need to rush. It's fine to take your time." That was odd, but I shrugged it off. I figured maybe she thought I'd missed something by finishing early. Except I hadn't. She approved my work without any changes. Then it started happening more often. Anytime I completed something ahead of schedule, Linda would make some kind of snide comment about how I must beat skimming or cutting corners to finish so quickly. She even brought it up in a team meeting once, saying, "We're not in a race here, people. Quality matters more than speed." Which I totally agree with, but my work was high quality, so I didn't understand the criticism. The tipping point came last week. We had a new client presentation to prepare for, and I volunteered to create the slide deck. It wasn't a huge task, and I know PowerPoint inside and out, so I finished the slides in one afternoon. I sent them to Linda for feedback, thinking she'd appreciate getting them early so we could make changes if needed. But instead of saying anything about the slides themselves, she called me into her office and accused me of showing off and making the rest of the team look bad. Her exact words were, "You need to stop trying to be a hero. You're setting unrealistic expectations, and it's making everyone else feel pressured." I was floored. I wasn't trying to show off, I just wanted to get my work done so we'd have extra time to polish it if needed. I tried explaining this to Linda, but she doubled down, saying that I needed to slow down and focus on collaboration, not speed. But here's the thing, I do collaborate. I don't hog tasks or refuse to share credit. I just happen to work quickly because I'm efficient. Is that really such a bad thing? I talked to a few of my coworkers about it, and they had mixed reactions. One of them said Linda might feel threatened because I'm outperforming her expectations. Another suggested Linda just has a different style and prefers a slower, more methodical approach. But one coworker hinted that Linda has a bit of a micromanaging streak and might actually like it when projects drag on, because it gives her more opportunities to oversee and tweak things. I honestly don't know what to think anymore. I've been trying to adjust my pace to make Linda happy, but it feels unnatural to deliberately work slower. And it's frustrating because I take pride in being efficient and reliable. So, Reddit, my question is, why would my boss hate that I'm efficient? Isn't that a good thing? Am I missing something here? And if not, how do I deal with this without completely burning out or getting on Linda's bad side? Next story, is it normal to feel guilty for not inviting my best friend to my wedding? Okay, Reddit, buckle up because this is a long one. I, 30F, am getting married in 3 months, and while I should be excited, I've been losing sleep over something that's been eating away at me. It's about my best friend, Claire, 31F, and why she isn't invited to the wedding. For some background, Claire and I have been friends for over 15 years. We met in high school, bonded over our mutual love of bad teen dramas, and have been inseparable ever since, or at least we were until a few years ago. Even though life took us in different directions, she stayed in our hometown while I moved to a big city for work. We always made an effort to stay close. We'd call each other regularly, plan visits, and celebrate all the big milestones together. She even helped me plan my move, and I was her maid of honor when she got married 6 years ago. But things started to change about 3 years ago, around the time Claire had her first baby. Don't get me wrong, I was over the moon for her. She'd always wanted to be a mom, and I thought she'd be amazing at it. And she is. But after her son was born, our friendship started feeling one-sided. Claire became so consumed with her new role as a mom that she stopped making time for anything else. Every conversation we had revolved around her baby. Every time I tried to share something about my life, she'd cut me off with, "Oh, that's great. But guess what the baby did today?" At first, I tried to be understanding. I knew her life had changed in a huge way, and I didn't want to seem selfish. But over time, it got harder. She missed my birthday 2 years in a row, canceled our plans last minute more times than I could count, and rarely checked in on me unless I reached out first. I told myself this was just a phase and that things would balance out eventually. Spoiler alert, they didn't. The breaking point came last year. My fiancé, Ethan, 33M, proposed during a surprise trip to the mountains, and I was ecstatic. Naturally, Claire was one of the first people I called to share the news. Her response? "Oh, that's nice." So, about the baby's sleep schedule, she barely acknowledged my engagement before steering the conversation back to herself. I tried not to let it bother me, but it stung. Then, a few weeks later, Claire completely forgot about my engagement party. She RSVP'd yes, so I assumed she'd show up. I even saved her a seat next to me. But she didn't come, didn't text, didn't call, nothing. When I reached out the next day, she apologized and said she'd lost track of time because the baby was teething. I told her I understood, but deep down, I didn't. It felt like my life had taken a back seat to hers, and she didn't even notice. The wedding dilemma. Fast forward to wedding planning. Ethan and I decided to keep things small, just close family and a handful of friends. When it came time to make the guest list, I hesitated over Claire's name. Part of me felt like I had to invite her because of our history. But another part of me couldn't shake the resentment I'd been feeling. Every big moment in my life seemed to matter less and less to her, so why should she get a front row seat to this one? After weeks of agonizing, I decided not to invite her. It wasn't an easy choice, but I felt like our friendship had become so distant that it didn't make sense to include her anymore. I told myself it was the right decision and tried to move on. But of course, word got out. Claire found out about the wedding through mutual friends, and she called me, upset. She didn't outright ask why she wasn't invited, but it was clear she was hurt. She kept saying things like, "I always imagined I'd be there on your big day and I thought we were closer than that." I didn't have the heart to explain my reasons, so I just said we were keeping the guest list small and changed the subject. She didn't push it, but the conversation ended on an awkward note, and we haven't talked since. Here's the thing, I know our friendship isn't what it used to be, and I know I had valid reasons for not inviting Claire. But I still feel terrible about it. She's been such a huge part of my life for so long, and part of me wonders if I'm being unfair. Maybe I should have given her a chance to explain or make things right. Maybe I should have told her how I felt instead of just quietly cutting her out. Ethan thinks I made the right call. He says weddings should be about celebrating with people who actively support you, not people you feel obligated to invite. But every time I think about walking down the aisle without Claire there, I feel this nagging sense of loss. I miss the friend she used to be, and I can't help but wonder if I'm throwing away a 15-year friendship over something that could have been fixed. So, Reddit, here's my question, am I overthinking this? Is it normal to feel this guilty, or does this mean I made the wrong choice? Should I try to fix things with Claire before the wedding, or is it better to just let it go? I could really use some perspective on this because right now, I feel like I'm drowning in doubt. Update. So, I took some time to process everyone's advice, thank you, by the way, and decided to reach out to Claire. A lot of you suggested that I owed her a conversation, even if the friendship was rocky, and I realized that part of my guilt was tied to the fact that I'd never really told her how I felt. If I was going to move forward, whether that meant salvaging the friendship or letting it go, I needed closure. I sent Claire a text saying, "Hey, can we talk? I feel like we've been distant, and I want to clear the air." She replied almost immediately with, "Finally. I've been waiting for you to reach out." That response gave me mixed feelings, but I was determined to have an honest conversation, so I suggested a call later that evening. When we finally talked, things started off okay. I told her I'd been feeling like our friendship had drifted and that it hurt when she seemed so disengaged from my life over the past few years. I gave specific examples, like how she missed my engagement party and barely acknowledged my news when I got engaged. I also explained that this was part of why I struggled with inviting her to the wedding. It felt like she hadn't been present for a lot of my big moments, and I wasn't sure if she even cared. Claire's initial reaction surprised me. She apologized. She said she hadn't realized how much her actions, or lack thereof, had hurt me, and admitted that she'd been so consumed with her own life that she didn't stop to think about mine. For a moment, I thought we were on the path to patching things up. But then things took a turn. After her apology, Claire started to get defensive. She said things like, "Well, you could have told me how you were feeling sooner, and it's not fair to hold this against me when I've been juggling so much." She kept circling back to how hard motherhood had been for her and how I didn't understand what it was like to have real responsibilities. That last comment hit a nerve. I told her I understood that being a mom was challenging, but that didn't excuse her from making zero effort to maintain our friendship. I pointed out that other friends of mine, who also had kids, still managed to check in or show up when it mattered. That's when she got really upset. She said, "So now you're comparing me to your other friends? That's low, even for you." She accused me of being unsupportive and selfish, saying, "I can't believe you'd throw away our friendship just because I didn't prioritize your engagement party over my kids' needs." She even suggested that I was being petty by not inviting her to the wedding, as if I was trying to punish her. At that point, I was done trying to sugarcoat things. I told her that it wasn't about one missed event, it was about a pattern of behavior over years. I said I didn't feel like she valued our friendship anymore, and that inviting her to the wedding didn't feel authentic given how distant we'd become. She scoffed and said, "Well, I guess you're not the person I thought you were," and then hung up. I thought that would be the end of it, but of course, it wasn't. A few days later, I started getting messages from mutual friends asking why Claire wasn't invited to the wedding. Turns out, she'd been venting to people about how I betrayed her and ditched her after 15 years of friendship. Some of our friends were sympathetic to her, saying things like, "It must be so hard for her to feel left out." Others were more neutral, just wanting to know what happened. But one friend, let's call her Jenna, told me Claire had gone as far as to call me a selfish brat who only cares about appearances. I was furious. Not only was Claire twisting the story, but she was actively turning people against me. I decided I wasn't going to engage in a back and forth, so I kept my explanations short and simple. Claire and I have grown apart, and while I wish her the best, I didn't feel it was right to invite her to the wedding. Most people seemed to accept that, but a couple of them kept pressing, saying I should have been more understanding of Claire's struggles. The real kicker came last night when I got a message from Claire's husband, Adam. He said he wanted to apologize on her behalf and explained that she'd been struggling emotionally for a long time. He said she felt insecure about losing touch with people and that my wedding had brought all of those feelings to the surface. Then he dropped the bombshell, "Honestly, I think she's jealous of you." Apparently, Claire has been venting to Adam for years about how she feels like I moved on without her and how my life seems perfect while hers feels chaotic. She resented that I moved to the city, built a career, and now had this dream wedding planned, while she felt stuck in a never-ending cycle of parenting and financial stress. Adam admitted she hadn't handled her feelings well and apologized again for the way she'd treated me. I didn't know how to respond to that. On one hand, it gave me some clarity. I could finally understand why Claire had been so distant and dismissive. But on the other hand, it made me feel sad and frustrated. I had never tried to make Claire feel less than, and I hated that she'd been harboring these feelings instead of talking to me about them. Right now, I'm at a crossroads. Part of me wants to let go of the friendship entirely and focus on the people who actually support me. But another part of me wonders if there's still hope for reconciliation now that I know what's really been going on. Claire hasn't reached out since our argument, and honestly, I don't know if she ever will. So, Reddit, what would you do in my situation? Do I give Claire another chance, or is this friendship too far gone to save? Next story, can you get in trouble for returning a gift years later? Alright, this is a weird one, but it's been on my mind, and I don't know who else to ask. Here's the situation. About 5 years ago, my cousin, Eric, gave me a painting as a birthday gift. It wasn't just any painting, it was a massive, hand-painted abstract piece that he made himself. Eric is an artist, and he puts a ton of effort into his work, so at the time, I felt really honored to receive something so personal. The thing is, I don't like the painting. I never did. It's this bizarre mix of neon colors and jagged shapes, and while I can appreciate the effort, it just isn't my style. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to see in a nightclub, not in someone's living room. But Eric was so proud of it, and I didn't want to hurt his feelings, so I told him I loved it and hung it up in my apartment. For the first few months, I kept it in my living room, where it was impossible to miss. Anytime Eric came over, he'd point it out and say things like, "I knew this space was perfect for it." So I'd smile and nod and pretend I agreed. After a while, though, I moved it to my bedroom, partly because I couldn't stand looking at it anymore and partly because I got tired of my other friends joking about it. One of them even said it looked like a crime scene in a rave. I recently moved into a new place with my fiancé, and we've been slowly decorating and making it feel like home. The painting didn't make the cut. I kept it in storage for a while, but eventually, I decided to get rid of it. I didn't want to sell it or donate it because, well, Eric made it, and I was worried he might find out. So instead, I came up with what I thought was a genius idea: I'd return it to him. I figured it would be a win-win. Eric could have his art back, and I wouldn't have to deal with the guilt of tossing it. So, last week, I called him up and said, "Hey, I've been holding on to this painting you gave me for years, but I'm moving, and I don't have a good place for it anymore. Would you like it back?" At first, he sounded excited. He said something like, "Wow, I didn't think you'd kept it all this time." He agreed to take it back, so I dropped it off at his studio a few days later. I thought that was the end of it. Yesterday, I got a text from Eric that said, "Hey, I don't know how to say this, but giving back a gift feels kinda weird. It's like saying you don't appreciate it anymore." He followed up with, "I wish you'd just kept it, even if it was in storage or something. This feels hurtful." I was completely caught off guard. I thought I was doing something considerate by returning it, but now he's making me feel like I've done something wrong. I replied, "I didn't mean to upset you. I just thought you'd want it back since I don't have the space for it anymore." He hasn't responded since, but now I'm spiraling. After Eric's text, I called my mom to vent about the situation, and she told me something that made my stomach drop. Apparently, Eric sold a similar painting to a gallery last year for a huge sum of money. She didn't know the exact amount, but it was enough to make a big splash in our family group chat when it happened. Now I'm wondering, did I just give back something that could have been worth thousands of dollars? I never thought to ask if the painting had any value because, honestly, I didn't like it. But now I feel like I've accidentally handed him a free paycheck, and I can't decide if I'm overthinking it or if I made a huge mistake. Thank you for watching.